Hey, welcome to this week's episode of the Single Man Podcast. I'm your host, Carlton French, and this week I'm joined with my good friend, Vinny Sripathi.
Hey, how's it going? I grew up being a Hindu. I would be doing a lot of prayers and you'd be speaking these words, but never really sat with my heart. I went to college, signed up for religion as a freebie course. My teacher that I had for that class, that guy was basically my mentor because he was teaching all these Eastern Asian religion courses. I found out he was like an Orthodox Christian. My roommate from college was like, you should really try Christianity. Give it a try and see how it goes. We are social creatures. We are built to have that social battery. Even if you're an introvert, you still need that time with people. God wants you to have a community. Not having a friend just helping you along the way feels very daunting. Reason I feel like I've become saved is how much my heart posture's changed and how much he's changed my life to start living the life I wanted. Just having this hero-esque mindset, wanting to be this light of the world. That kind of mindset is what's needed to fight the sin of this world. And it's a struggle. It's going to be a constant battle. It's going to suck. But how much love and how much passion you give to fight this suffering in this world, fighting for a cause bigger than yourself. That's where a lot of your fulfillment and purpose comes from for those people who feel purposeless. Challenge yourself constantly.
You have to be a little bit patient.
I felt like I was in a hole looking up.
The whole idea is you have to become content in singleness.
I'd be lying if I said I haven't fired off some Instagram DMs.
The word dating is not mentioned in the Bible.
I dedicated my life at Tomorrow World to Jesus.
Welcome to the Single Man Podcast, where we delve into candid conversations with Christian men about their journey to faith, advice for their younger selves, and navigating dating. With a heart to reach men from all walks of life, dive into real stories of redemption, growth, and the hope found in following Jesus. I'm your host, Carlton French, a 29-year-old single Christian, and I'm excited for you to listen to this week's episode. Let's jump into it. Hey, welcome to this week's episode of the Single Man Podcast. I'm your host, Carlton French, and this week I'm joined with my good friend, Vinny Sripathi.
Hey, how's it going? Glad to be here.
Vinny, thanks for coming on, man. I'm excited to have the audience listen to some of your story today, and I've personally been encouraged through learning about your journey to faith and how you're navigating being a single man in Atlanta. And so I'll give a little introduction on Vinny. We've been friends through our church in Atlanta, Passion City Church, for the last 6 months or so. And Vinny recently started coming to church about a year ago. Yeah. And that's what thing I think is really interesting about your story, how you actually weren't raised a Christian at all. You were raised in the Hindu religion. Mm-hmm. And I'm excited for the audience to hear about that. And you actually studied religion in college, and you have come to now the belief in Jesus. And I think that's a really unique story and something that I think will resonate well with single men out there. So you're 25.
Yep.
You live in Midtown Atlanta.
Yeah. And a skyscraper.
Living in the big city. Yeah. Working for Ernst & Young in consulting, cybersecurity, which is super cool, hacking and whatnot.
A big man with a big job.
Yep. Yeah. And you're telling me you're really excited about learning to sing right now and playing the guitar, and you are a great ping pong player.
Yeah. I mean, it was my New Year's resolution, honestly, for singing and learning the guitar, honestly. Well, it's been a struggle. Like, I tried learning it back in college. Yeah. And I feel like my fingers were never big enough to play chords. But now, like, being 25, all of a sudden I feel like now that I do it again, it comes so naturally to me. So I mean, that could be God playing a part in that. So it's awesome to have some accountability and just be able to learn a new skill. Yeah. Like something that I personally want to do.
Yeah. I love that.
But also like very active.
Right. You're telling me you're big into kickboxing?
Yeah. Kickboxing, Muay Thai, kind of two sides of the same coin. Yeah. It's like Muay Thai is just basically like kickboxing, but you use elbows and knees whenever you're fighting. So those are you don't want to get hit by an elbow. That thing will break your nose instantly. Yeah. And still do running, soccer, tennis, things like that. Right. Normal people stuff.
Right. Just normal people stuff.
Yeah. Everyone does that sort of stuff.
And you're single, right?
I am indeed single.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Cool. I'm excited to talk about kind of your story, Vinny, and let's kick it off with the last week or so. What's kind of been happening in your life recently? What's been something that's been a high, something that's been a low that you've been working through this last week?
Sure. In terms of I like to start with the good stuff. So the good stuff is was able to get dinner with a couple friends, or lunch with a different friend that I recently connected with, and hear his story and how we were pretty similar people, like growing up. Like, he was a pastor's kid and always fell on that side of I'm doing all this good for God, and it feels like he's rewarding the lamb that's run away, or the son that's run away, and the prodigal son story and things like that. So it's we felt a kinship bond between those two. We have very similar stories and souls on that end, and just being able to connect with them and get dinner and have him have a new experience with Chinese food, and having Peking duck and things like that. I always love to treat people like that, where it's I spend most of my money on my friends and food,
right,
and having new experiences. So
hopefully
one day you'll join me for Peking duck.
Right. I'm waiting for the invite. So.
Let me know. I'll send you the invite.
And then what's something that's been a low you've been working through recently, just so people can get to know you a little bit better?
I guess, that's fair. I mean, it's pretty, apt to say that girl stuff and dealing with that, it's gotten me a little bit down, especially with this girl I was really interested in and wanted to get to know. And I felt like God was giving me these signs, all of it, for it all of a sudden to be taken away. So gotta take it with stride. You can't put all of your feelings into that one basket. It's why having all these hobbies really helps build out your skill set and helps you distract yourself from those sort of things,
right,
if necessary.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah, man, I appreciate you sharing that and coming on this week with everything that's been going on. So I think it's cool to have people see the highs and the lows, right? Everything's not always highs in life. So it's great. What do you think about your story and how you grew up? I'm interested to hear kind of about your upbringing and how you were raised Hindu, and how did that kind of come about? I haven't really met many people, to be honest, that were raised Hindu.
Sure. Well, it all started back in 1998 when I was born.
Yeah.
And that's where it all started. Well, I guess that is when I was born. But I feel like growing up, especially as a kid who's Hindu, and my parents, everyone in my family is still following that same religion. I'm the only one who's kind of strayed away, more or less, and fallen under Christianity, more or less.
Right.
But yeah, I grew up being a Hindu for the most part. I would be doing a lot of prayers in my home language of Telugu, and you'd be speaking these words because my dad kind of drilled it into my mind of what to say, how to pronounce these words, but it never really meant anything to me because it's I would ask my dad for the meaning, but it never really sat with my heart. And just hearing all these I guess meditation chants and being able to, it'd be opening up the Bible and reading a Bible verse, but in a different language that you can, if someone says it to you, you'll be able to kind of understand it, but I never really got the true meaning behind it. So it's I already had this distance between Hinduism and me growing up as is. And as well as I never was really fond of the caste system growing up generally.
Yeah.
I don't think.
And what is the caste system for people that don't know what that is?
Yeah. So in Hinduism, there's everyone is separated by class. So there's 4 different classes. There's the Brahmin system, which is the the priestly side of things. So that's always at the top.
Okay.
Then there's the Kshatriyas, which is the kings, nobles, and landowners, as well as the warriors. So soldiers and things like that. So that falls under the second category. That's where my family is. Landowners, kingdom people, soldiers. Okay. And third is there's one that starts with a V. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but it's basically artisanal people, merchants, things like that.
Okay.
And then finally there's the untouchables, which is like the lowest of the low. Like a lot of people won't really deal with these people because just like the way they've been casted away from society. They've got like the jobs that no one really wants to deal with or touch with, like deal with.
Right.
So it's like these people are like outcasts of society almost. And it's just because you're born into that, that's kind of where you're at. And the only way to escape it is to kind of marry out, is what I've learned. But it's been a few years since I've actually restudied up on Hinduism in college. But I've always had this inkling and idea of like in life, no one should be bound by where they're born and things like that. I don't think people should be labeled, essentially. Like a lot, like especially in modern day consumerism society, especially in dating, a lot of people put labels on people like, oh, I value this person more because of X quality. Like they're X attractive. Like she could be Latina and I value her more than, you know, this white girl I'm interested in.
Right.
Like a lot of people like to attach labels to all these people, and that's not how life should be.
Right.
No one should be like, you know, you shouldn't have that consumerism mindset of like, oh, I should hang out with these people because I'll get X out of this. Or I shouldn't talk to these people, these untouchable people, because they'll just reduce my street cred or something like that. So just having that like essentially started up it's always been off for me. So that's honestly been the main reason why I strayed away from Hinduism. And that didn't really happen till about college time, honestly.
So you grew up like all through
high
college,
school.
you were Hindu, you were practicing and
Yeah.
Okay. What does it mean to like even practice Hinduism? Like just saying some prayers you said, or is there like a temple you go to, or?
It's a bit of both, I think. I mean, it's not like church every Sunday, right?
Okay.
At least for me when I grew up. It was more just I would go to like every evening, like right before dinner, we would have this prayer. And depending on like, you know, for instance, when my grandfather died on my dad's side, like we would have a prayer time specifically for him, and it'd be like on the 27th of December. So every time that day, there'd be a special one for him. So it's like on momentous occasions and things like that.
Yeah.
But in terms of temple stuff and temple worship, that would happen like once a month, or like sometimes we go up to Atlanta, like maybe 3 or 4 times a year, like once a quarter, and essentially go up and do worship. So in an Indian temple, it's it's way different than I think any Christian church you would go to, where, you know, how it's hard to explain Hinduism because it's both can be polytheistic and monotheistic, depending on your explanation of it. But if you step into a temple, there's a lot of different gods. So it's polytheistic in terms of like the temple you walk into. And the one I'd go to in Atlanta, you would walk upstairs and there'd be like 6 to like 9 different places of like different gods. And you would have a different verse, more or less, if I could explain it like that, that you would like pray to the God about.
Okay.
And, you know, your prayer is meaningful, but it's kind of like set in stone.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much variation in it. So it's like you say the specific verse in front of a God and, you know, donate if you want to donate. And then just, you know, go to a different God.
And so how does it work in Hinduism after you die? Is there like the concept of heaven, or what does that look like in Hinduism?
In Hinduism, so that's also like, it kind of depends on people. Most, at least for me, my perspective, it's this idea of reincarnation. So this accumulation of karma, which karma is like whether or not you've done enough good deeds in your life to kind of outweigh your bad deeds.
Right.
So if like, you know, you're being a good person and like helping others and things like that, accumulates good karma, and that good karma will help you come back into the next life a better like in a better stature. So if you like, for instance, if you did enough bad karma, right? Like you became like a terrible person, things like that. Next life, you come back as like, I don't know, a flower. Or like a different animal, or like a stray dog or something like that.
Can you move between the caste systems that way, or no?
That's how I assumed that most people would like move between caste systems, or at least that's how they probably imagined it back in the day.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, I was born into this life. If I do enough good, I'll move up to the next one in my next life.
Right.
And like I'll be born like a noble's son or something like that.
Okay.
And that's just how I assume they imagined it.
Right.
In terms of like, this is the same soul that's being recycled into this next life.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's this fascinating hole that I tried going down at one point, but
Yeah.
it means nothing in terms of Christianity.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to have that as your background, though,
Yeah.
for coming to faith. So then you get to college, right, and you're actually studying religions, right?
Yeah.
So how did that come about? Like
where
you
did that
decided to
start?
start studying religions.
Well, I've always had this like weird relationship with religion where it's like almost agnostic of like, there's a God, but you don't really know much about it.
Yeah.
Or you don't know like where to even begin. So I've had that inklingness throughout, I would say like through middle school and high school and things like that.
Okay.
There'd be like, there was instances, and this is something I struggled with, like generally, even like for the past few months of like, there are times where I would pray for, this was big for me back then because, Indian, studious, all that.
Right. Right.
But like I would lose my binder because I have a habit of losing things from time to time. Like I would lose my binder and my homework would be in it for like math class in 7th grade. And the next day I just remember like praying vigorously for it for like the next 2 days. And then all of a sudden I find it in the most random location in a place that I would never put it before. Just like, it was like under a seat that I don't ever sit in the back in like a little compartment under that seat. And I was like, why is that there? But I'm glad I have it. And then that homework was due that morning and I just got it done.
Right.
But it's like things like that where it's like, that just doesn't happen naturally. I don't think like that. There's no way that's just a coincidence that just pops up again at that time.
Right.
So I've always had this idea of like, there's a God that exists.
Something's like making this happen here. Like,
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't my own doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's not just like sheer luck or coincidence. I don't think.
Okay.
Because I mean, I've checked at that seat before because it was my homeroom.
Right.
And it wasn't there before, so it just popped up randomly.
Right. So then you start actually like, okay, I'm gonna study this in college. Like, okay,
Yeah.
try to figure out what actually.
Yeah.
Is there a truth or something like that?
It kind of.
Okay.
Well, it's always led me to believe like there is a God out there that controls things that we don't know of, right? And just having that, well, it's both having that belief, but also like, well, I know that Hinduism is not really like for me specifically. So I went to college and honestly, I signed up for religion as a freebie course. So I want to get my GPA.
This will be an easy A.
Yeah, get my GPA up and learn something new.
Yeah.
And it was like the first course I took was like India, China, Japan, because like I like Asian stuff, like Asian culture stuff,
Yeah.
like Asian food, and like I watched Avatar: The Last Airbender growing up, things like that.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like those little things that have like always influenced me a little bit in terms of like, oh, I want to learn more about like Buddhism and things like that, and like meditation, and that's honestly been what's kind of like my gateway to it.
Okay.
My teacher that I had for that class, I mean, I made 100 in that class. It's the only time I've ever made 100 in my life.
Wow. Beast.
Big stuff. Big stuff. India, China, Japan, religion 1002.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's been a journey since then, because like that guy was basically my mentor, because he was teaching all these Eastern Asian religion courses. But when I talked to him after, like, one-on-one, because I would always walk him back to his car, and because I had nothing better to do,
Right.
for like an hour or two,
Right.
and just had these like long conversations. I found out he was like an Orthodox Christian.
Really?
And like this guy would never really talk about his own religion. Like he wouldn't really talk about Christianity. He was just like a dude that just enjoyed learning new stuff and learning about Eastern Asian religions and things like that. So I went through college, and I mean, he was a big factor into why I became a Christian,
Right.
but not until later.
Right.
But throughout college, I was studying a lot of different religions. So like I would study Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, Shintoism. So like literally everything in terms of like Asian cultures, because I never really found myself in that Judaism, like Islam sort of realm or Christianity. Like I never had any interest in learning any of that and like monotheism stuff. So I always wanted to go into like, I thought Buddhism would be a good place to start. So I took a lot of like Eastern Asian religion courses, and I really learned about, Siddhartha Gautama and all that, and really found myself under that umbrella of Buddhism. And it's fascinating to learn. Like there's actually a decent amount of similarities between Siddhartha Gautama and Jesus.
Yeah.
When it comes to like, if you look at it from like kind of like a historical context sort of thing.
Right.
Granted, one's like a few hundred years before the other.
Yeah.
Because Siddhartha came like, I don't remember the exact year. It's like 600 BC or something like that. And then Jesus is like 4 BC, 6 BC. Things like that. So like it really got me that love for understanding Buddhism.
Yeah.
And that whole like, this was a time of my life where I was like pretty depressed. Like I was dealing with depression from like 18 to like 23, 24.
Yeah. Right.
And one of the biggest things that Buddhism teaches you is about the cycle of like suffering. So it's like understanding that in this world that, you're suffering, and then understand that everyone in this world is suffering in one way or another. And that there's statistically, and there's also got to be one person out there in this world currently that's suffering the exact same problem you are, the exact same situation, the exact same problem as you are. And once you understand that you are not alone in your struggle and in your fight, you can finally release yourself from this victimized cycle of of suffering.
Yeah.
Like, sure, your struggle sucks, but you're not alone in that struggle.
And that's what Buddhism teaches?
Yeah.
Okay.
I forgot what the actual I know there's the Eightfold Path and all that, but that's a different thing.
Yeah.
I know I like to term it the cycle of suck.
Okay. Yeah.
When you understand the cycle of suck.
Okay. So at that point
that really stuck with me, and that really like helped me kind of move a little bit past my depression part.
Right. That part of Buddhism kind of resonated with you.
Yeah, and it got me to study more and
so then
love it.
Would you say you ever became like a Buddhist?
Yeah,
or
I was definitely, I didn't go to like any Buddhist monasteries or
right,
things like
You're
that.
like following the religion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like understanding it from a academic and then moving it to like a practicing practicing standpoint.
And so at what point are you kind of first exposed to Jesus and like church and the gospel? Like how did that come about?
Sure. That's, it was a recent one. It's a recent discovery, like 2022 of November.
Yeah.
That's when my struggles with Buddhism kind of started to occur. Of like, I understood it and I practiced it, but it was still like, Buddhism's a very self-improvement, self-centered sort of religion, where it's not like Christianity's more fellowship based. And I encourage like anyone listening to be rooted in fellowship, that if you don't have that, you're not really understanding Christianity. Right. If you don't.
Right.
Because like God wants you to have a community. God wants you to be surrounded by people. Our bodies are built to be social. We are social creatures. We are built to have that social battery. Even if you're an introvert, like sure, it'll take less time for you to get charged up in your social battery. Like it might take 2 hours versus an extrovert who's like 8 hours.
Yeah.
But you still need that time with people, like, or else life just kind of sucks.
Right.
And I feel like with Buddhism, it was really just that lack of that, especially with like, I had friends, don't get me wrong, but a lot of it, I was just leading a life I wasn't wanting to live, essentially. That was the biggest thing. And like, there were times where I just like, the depression would just hit back hard and things like that. And it wasn't until November where my roommate from college was like, you should really try Christianity. You should like give it a try and see how it goes.
Really?
Yeah. And one of the biggest things that really, like, there were two reasons why that kind of like came back to that decision. One was my mentor that I talked about back in the day.
Right. You're like, oh, he was a Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. If Drew Craver ever listens to this, like, I'll shout out to him.
Shout out.
He's a beast.
Yeah.
But he doesn't, like, when I left UGA, he also had his last class at UGA.
Oh, okay.
So I had his last class with him, it's a good parting way.
Yeah.
And it was in medieval Christianity, funnily enough.
Okay.
in a class. I had no idea what I was doing because I didn't study Christianity beforehand.
Yeah. Right.
Um,
So your roommate's like, hey, go maybe try out
Yeah.
Christianity, and so then
he brought
what'd
me
you
to
do?
he brought me to Passion from December and January, and I think a little bit in February, like every other week, because going alone is definitely like most people would just like go alone, sit in the back corner, and leave.
Right.
And it's something very foreign to him. God doesn't really want to, like, it feels like it's like a lot of alone time with God. And a lot of people, if it's something so new, not having a friend just helping you along the way feels very daunting. Especially running into a church. I don't think anyone wants to go into a place with 5,000 people or 3,000 people or something like that and just be like, I'm new, guys.
Right.
And start talking to people.
It's like it can be intimidating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so just having that as like a grace period for me and just going with them.
Right.
And his fiance, now wife. It's it's fascinating.
So you started going to Passion, and
Yep.
you're going with your roommate, and
Granted, he lives in Athens, so it's like this is an hour drive for him to come every time.
Wow,
Yeah.
okay.
That's some commitment.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so you're going, and then how do you actually come to belief in Jesus? Like, how did that process come about?
Yeah. I mean, after February was done, of course, like I didn't just like start going alone. I mean, I had like that's when I finally got a Bible study and I met some of like my life, like honestly lifelong friends now.
Yeah.
But it's only been a year. It's actually
Right.
been less than a year since I've met these people. But like to just be integrated in that group and just be like integrated in church now,
Yeah.
just spreading your roots as far as possible. It's like, it feels like a lot of people say it's like, I feel like I've been friends with you for years, but
Yeah.
lo and behold, I've been here for less than a year.
It's like surprising for me to remember that you've only been part of church for a year or so now.
Yeah. And like, I wouldn't even count the first 3 months because it was mostly like me and like my roommate getting brunch afterwards, and that's about it.
Yeah.
So like, honestly, March would be the first time it'd be like a full year since
Right.
I've been at church.
Right.
And just seeing like how much, like in the duality, like seeing how much God's transformed me and changed the way, like the reason I feel like I've become saved is how much my heart postures sort of changed and how much he's changed my life to start living the life I wanted. So like playing soccer and like being really active were things I wasn't very keen on doing too much. Like it was things I always wanted to do, but I never had like the community or the people to do it.
Right.
I always felt like if I was going to do it, it's going to be the task I'd have to do alone.
Yeah.
And now having that and seeing how much God's changed me with like friends and people I've met and like, how much he's changed my life internally. Like it's just so like, it's such a transformation that like, there's no other way to explain it except through God. So that's like, it was back in June when I finally gave my life to Christ and things like that. But it was only through like retrospective thinking that I gave myself to Christ. And like, this is like, even at this current time, I haven't been baptized or anything like that. I don't think I've even told the pastor or anyone else, like, you know, high up, like I've never put my light bulb in the church or things like that.
Right.
Just because like I'm still waiting for the right timing for that to happen.
Yeah.
I feel like there's going to be a right moment for that to happen. And
Passion for people that don't know, there's like, if you become saved or you put your faith in Jesus at a gathering, then you can get a light bulb and screw it into the wall at Passion.
Yeah, it's like becoming a new light for the light of the world, essentially.
Right. So when you first kind of believed in Jesus, was that through kind of getting plugged in with community, you think, or was it actually like you understood who Jesus was and what he had done for you specifically?
Yeah, I mean, so actually to go back to that one point of like, what spurred the curiosity to begin with of Jesus?
Yeah.
2 main points were for it. Like one was my professor that I met way back when.
Right.
And the other one, like a part of like my old life, and I haven't really done it since, was being a big video gamer. I know we've talked about it before.
Yeah.
But like I used to be a competitive, almost semi-competitive video game player. Like this was before like it got really rampant. Like this was before Fortnite, I'll be honest, half of it.
Yeah.
And I used to be a big Call of Duty player, and I used to be a big Super Smash Bros. Player. But one of the games that I played, and he's in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, well, both of them are, is Pyramithra and Shulk from the game Xenoblade. And shout out to that game. That game honestly changed me a lot in terms of like how I approach life and things like that. A lot of the music really inspires me to this day. But just having this kind of hero-esque mindset that charges me through life and like wanting to be this light of the world to change a world that is in strife and trying to make this a better place. Like that kind of mindset is what's needed to fight like the sin of this world half of the time.
Yeah.
And it's a struggle. It's not going to be like, oh, it's going to be a constant battle. It's going to suck. But those times where it's like now how much love and how much passion you give to fight like this suffering in this world, like you're fighting for a cause bigger than yourself. And that's where a lot of your fulfillment and purpose comes from for those people who feel purposeless, is fighting for something bigger than yourself.
Right.
I mean, that's what soldiers do, right? A lot of their purpose comes in for fighting for a country. It's not fighting for themselves and their survival. It's fighting for the country, for something bigger, for freedom.
Yeah.
Of like, you know, those countries that are oppressed.
Right.
Like they're fighting for concepts that they believe in rather than fighting for things that they struggle with, which is survival or like, you know, just purposeless fighting.
Yeah.
Like,
and you feel like Jesus, or like understanding who Jesus was, has given you that sense of purpose?
yeah, I mean, that game is very, very Jesus-centric. And it only took me until after I started wanting to learn more about Christ that it started to reveal itself more. And there's a lot of videos on it, and just a lot of the songs are very, like, you can hear it. Like, you can hear God in it.
Okay.
And I mean, music has been literally the biggest part of my life. Like, if video games were like, you know, playing competitively only meant so much, music was a bigger part of my life. It's what saved me in my depression time.
Yeah.
So just having that stuff, and it helps me move forward. And I think everyone needs that little crutch in life where it helps them move forward.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be video games for all intents and purposes, but like having a little crutch to keep people moving forward towards their purpose in this world that seems very purposeless, especially in a recession and things like that. Like, well, they haven't said it's a recession, but like, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But just having that, like, moving forward, like where it's like in a time of like, there's a lot of people struggling and a lot of people are like victimizing themselves, having something that they're fighting for in the future and setting yourself in the future. That's a huge part of Christianity, right? Is finding hope for the future.
Right. And so let's say someone's listening, like a single guy out there, he is, you know, Hindu or Buddhist now, and is kind of not finding that purpose in life, or they're trying to figure it out, right? What advice would you have for someone out there like that who was maybe where you were before a couple of years ago?
Shoot, that's a tough one. I feel like advice can only be received when a person fully understands. Like, you know, you could give advice to people, but it go in 1 year and come out the other.
Sure. Yeah. Or advice, let's say advice you'd have for your younger self. Like, all right, if you could go back and talk to
Younger
18-year-old, 21-year-old Vinny, what would you tell him?
Oh, Jesus. I'd tell him a lot of stuff, but I tell him life doesn't get any better at 25. No, I'm kidding. I feel like it would be just have faith and patience sometimes. Because a lot of people, like, I think the biggest difference between Christianity and a lot of the other religions that I didn't really get a touch on until now is this, like, it feels like rules and regulations, and like you have to follow this strict set of things to finally, like, you know, to follow the religion and to be in good graces of God.
Right.
And if you break it, then, you know, you're not going to be saved and things like that. And I feel like, you know, when people from other denominations of church, right, think of Christianity, like you think of like the other sects other than non-denominational, which is, I think, what Passion City is.
Right.
It's non-denominational.
Yeah.
Like, they look at us as heretics. Like, you're not following these rules. You're all going to be sinners anyways. Like, you're all, like, I feel like that just falls under the same religion sphere that Christianity is trying to break.
Right.
Like, it's all about Jesus. And Jesus told us to do one thing, and that's to love on people. And I feel like if you're doing that and you're doing that well, and doing that with good intentions, and you've postured your heart towards Jesus and giving God's love to people, which is agape love in Greek, then you're doing God's work at the end of the day. There's no rules you have to follow. There's none of that. It's just loving on people, which I think everyone should do anyways.
Right.
So it gives this sense of freedom away from all these rules and regulations all of a sudden we've bounded ourselves with. So I think a lot of people think religion is like, well, I don't want to say it's like the prodigal son, but it's like people think it's going to be like good works is what's going to save them. It's going to be karma that's going to save them.
Right.
It's like I have to follow God to try and attain this, like perfect life. That was the biggest struggle I had with my life, was like I felt like God was shaping me for me to be perfect when I don't want to be perfect. That's been my biggest struggle, honestly, like throughout my life. And just having that freedom of release of like, Jesus has done everything for you. You don't have to do anything, honestly. Just keep loving on people as much as you can.
Right.
And that's it.
Out of an overflow of what Jesus has done for you, you're to love others.
Yeah.
Not because I'm trying to do this so that I can get in good favor with Jesus and with God.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not like, it's not forced love. It's like, I'm not forcing you to go and love on other people. And all of a sudden God's going to be like, oh, here's a wife. There you go.
Vinny did enough good stuff. Here you get to go to heaven now, Vinny.
Yeah. It's like, you're not doing good graces to try and get good favors, so God will do whatever you want for you. That's still putting you at the control center. Right. It's just putting you in the driver's seat of everything in your life. No, it's the opposite. God loves you. There's this cool quote that I remember, and it's been a good way of thinking about how we're not doing this for God's love. Like, God's not doing this because he loves you. It's because you love God. And it's not because you're the hope of, there's this race called the high NT in this game, which is like people, but it's like humans, but with like wings. Anyways, it's a fantasy-ish game. But
what game is this?
Xenoblade.
Okay.
The one I was talking about before.
Okay.
So it's not because it's not because you are the hope of the high NT that I love you. It's because I love you that I want you to become that hope. So God doesn't want us, like, God's not loving you because of what you've done in your life. And he wants you to become this like light of this world. Like God already knows you're going to do that. And I'm going to look at this quote again because it's just easier to understand it.
Right.
It's because, God loves you and wants you to become that hope. It's not through your good works that he'll love you and you'll become that light. It's like you're not becoming that light just for God's love. It's because God loves you that he's making you become that light, sort of thing.
Right.
That's how.
So that really resonated with you.
Yeah.
And that was what was unique about Christianity compared to all the other religions that you grew up with and studied and researched.
Yeah, for sure. It's
Okay.
this relationship with God versus this God is this foreign figure that you're trying to chase.
Right. That's awesome, man. I love your story. I think it's so unique, and
Thank you.
It's special. You know, I'm sure there's people listening that they weren't raised in church and they were, raised in different religion. And okay, is this really true? Like, how can I know? Like, what's the difference between my religion and Christianity and other religions out there? And this is someone, Vinny, you did the work, you researched it, you practiced two of the other major religions.
Yeah.
And came to the conclusion that Christianity must be what's actually true. And that's what you're following now. So yeah, I love that, man. And I want to talk a little bit about, now that you've become a Christian, like, how have you been approaching dating, and you're still single now.
Sure.
What's maybe changed in your mindset around dating now that you're a Christian compared to previously when you weren't a Christian?
Yeah. I'll take a little bit of a step back and say, like, for me, dating has always been a struggle. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
Like, in my lifetime, I've been pretty passive and frugal about dating generally. And that's honestly been one of the biggest sources of my depression that I had for the longest time that's plagued me.
Yeah.
And that is like a catch-22 of like, oh, I'm not dating and I'm stuck. You're stuck in the cycle of suck.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, I'm not dating and it's caused me depression. And then the depression doesn't really allow you to date. So you're in this cycle of like, now I can't really date for the longest time.
Right.
And through those times, I feel like that's the dark period that God finally, it's worked through me and helped me understand who he is and really formed who I am today. And, you know, serving people and loving people is something I've always loved doing generally. And now having a place to put it all into and pour that love into, it's been a great place to, Christianity's just been like where I needed to be this whole time. I just never knew.
Right.
Sort of place.
Yeah. And you're not looking, like previously it sounds like you were looking for that relationship to kind of get you out of this cycle of suck, so to speak.
Yeah.
And now you don't necessarily need the relationship to get out of it.
Yeah. It was this place of like, I put it in place of God, where it's like this love will be the only place that'll, like having a wife would just be that place of God where it's like,
I won't be depressed anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Like my life, all my problems will be fixed and things like that. And that's never, ever going to be the case.
Right.
She's human. You're human. You're built two sinful people. You're going to fail each other at one point.
Right.
And having that, putting someone on a pedestal like that, whether you're a guy or a girl, like this person will fix all your problems, it's gonna tear you down. Like it's always gonna let you down.
Right.
And I will say, like, especially like back in the day, a lot of people, even me included, when looking for the right partner, a lot of us would just look like, oh, attractive, that's the green light.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Right.
Like, that's all there is to a checklist. But I encourage people to honestly build out a checklist of what they want in a woman. And I don't mean like, you know, she can cook, she can do laundry for me, she can do all this to make me lazier.
Right.
No, I want you to actually figure out what you want in a person. Is she kind? Is she caring? Like, you know, you could talk about like what sort of occupation, like servitude occupation, things like that.
Right.
So like, is she like a teacher, like a waitress, things like that.
Yeah.
Like you go down that rabbit hole, but I want it to be more like quality. Like how often is she in the Bible and things like that? How good of a Christian is she? Does she serve at the church? What does she do at the church?
Right.
How often does she go? Things like that. Like, I feel like when you start breaking it down like that, when you start breaking it down to the qualities of what she does with her actions in church and how she loves God,
right,
that's the shining beacon where you want to start.
Yeah. I think not even just at church, right? Like just in life, what is she doing?
Sure. Yeah.
On a daily basis.
Yeah. And how does she interact with her friends, right? Like, how does she interact with people she doesn't know? Like with waiters and waitresses,
right,
and like, you know, like hotel people, like bellhops and things like that. Like, you want to see how she treats people who are serving her. And like, if she's treating them nasty, like, you probably don't want to hang out with a person like that.
Right.
Because that bleeds into other parts of her personality and things like that.
So before you were a Christian, you were mainly just focused on like, attractiveness, and now you're like, okay, there's all these other areas that I should evaluate on.
Yeah. And I feel like one of the books, I know probably some other people on the podcast probably have talked about this book, but Tim Keller's The Meaning of Marriage. Understanding the purpose of marriage too, of why God's created this covenant between two people.
Yeah.
And understanding that for a marriage, it's about two people shining each other, like polishing each other up.
Right.
So when they're in front of God, they're best versions of themselves in front of God.
Right.
And it's through continuously serving each other, loving each other, and working with each other, that we're able to be our best versions of ourselves. Sure, we're going to have our, you know, bickering moments. Sure, we're going to have points where we're going to be mad at each other. But those parts are what also strengthens us. And through this, like, grace that we give each other, that we're able to love each other even more. Yeah. Even if we don't really, like, can't stand each other in that moment. It's just a moment in time of an eternity of life together. So
yeah, man. So last thing, Vinny, and then we'll wrap up with this. Let's say, okay, someone has been listening, single man out there. Okay, I just listened 40-minute podcast. All right, great story. This guy, Vinny, you know, he was raised Hindu, became Buddhist. Now he's found this hope in Jesus and has found this purpose for his life, and he doesn't have to chase God anymore.
Yeah.
What's one thing, okay, someone's going to go back to their Friday now. They're going to go back to the work day, or maybe they're going out, you know, with some friends tonight to the bars, or some guy's got a date. What's one thing you want someone to take away and, okay, maybe write this down, or, okay, have this be my one takeaway from listening to that conversation with Vinny?
Challenge yourself constantly. Take yourself out of your comfort zone. And I feel like if you want to start discovering a relationship with God, he wants to discover one with you. Like, he's been waiting the longest time for you. The door, like you're 1 foot, like if you're in front of this door, that door is wide open for you to step through. And God wants you to step through that. That's it at the end of the day. Everything you make in life is a choice. And I encourage people to make that choice, to step into that light and step into the world of God and build that relationship, because he wants that more than you think.
So good, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Dude,
Thanks for having me.
Encouraged by this conversation, and encouraged by your testimony, Vinny, and just our friendship. It's been awesome to be in the front row seat of kind of your transformation these last few months. So
yeah,
thank you so much, everybody, for listening in. I hope that this conversation and Vinny's story encouraged you. And if it did, then I would hope that you would shoot it to a friend that you think maybe would resonate with Vinny's story or is trying to figure out religion and where they're at. And our hope is that it encourages one single guy out there. So thanks so much for tuning in this week, and we'll be back next Friday with the new episode. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Single Man Podcast. If someone you know would benefit from this week's episode, I'd love for you to text them the link and invite them to listen. You never know how a simple invitation could change someone's life. We'll be back next Friday at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, with a new episode. Until then, check out the video version of the podcast on YouTube, and you can engage with us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.